In the first chapter of Emery Lee's 2021 novel Meet Cute Diary, the protagonist laments the state of his love life. He's frustrated with his lack of romantic connection, but also resigned to this being the way that things are. He narrates, "But then, I also know how this works. I'm a gay, triracial trans guy who only passes when the sun aligns with the moon just right and the earth tilts upside down. Dudes like me don't just get to stumble into a perfect little meet cute. No, we want meet cutes. We have to make them ourselves." My name is Alex Henderson, and I'm a PhD candidate studying creative writing and lit studies on Ngunnawal land at the University of Canberra. In this presentation, I'll be exploring the emerging concept of genre-savvy protagonists in queer young adult romance. LGBTQIA+ characters, and their quests for love, are increasingly appearing in YA fiction, and more specifically in YA romantic comedies. The rom-com, particularly in its most mainstream familiar Hollywood form, has long been rooted in the boy meets girl model of heteronormativity, something these young, marginalized protagonists are written to be keenly aware of. The authors I'm going to discuss place their works deliberately in an intertextual conversation. They have their characters directly reference classic rom-coms or demonstrate an encyclopedic knowledge of tropes and genre conventions, including the fact that queer love often simply does not exist within this framework. As that quote from Lee's protagonist above emphasizes, they know how this works. The tension between desiring to conform to romantic tropes and patterns versus the risk of being shut out of a happily ever after for not fitting its popular model is an anxiety that underlines these novels, leading to both comedy and drama. Tropes and conventions may function as a sort of shared language. As Farah Mendelssohn writes in Rhetorics of Fantasy, quote, "In one sense, this is almost the definition of genre, the building of that common Bible of expectations. These novels use this Bible of expectations, shared by their fictional characters and their implied readers, to underpin both a critique and a celebration of the rom-com formula. What I hope to do today is offer a brief insight into the growing population of genre-savvy queer rom-com heroes and the metatextual conversations that their stories potentially open." As Kylie Orton examines in her thesis Experimenting with Adulthood, many adolescent narratives involve a playful performance or mimicry of conventions and behaviours that signify maturity. One way this might manifest, with that performance aspect literal, is a fake dating plotline, wherein the characters, quote, "attempt to enact romance through constructed scenarios." This is the case in Meet Cute Diary, which involves the protagonist, Noah, embarking on a fake romance with a boy named Drew in order to prove a point to the internet trolls attempting to debunk his blog about trans happiness. And now Noah, being a romance genre nerd, knows that his fake relationship with Drew will inevitably and adorably unfold into something real. He even maps out the progress of their relationship against a 12-step romance narrative of his own creation, and as far as he can see, based on his knowledge of movies and fanfiction, their relationship is progressing just perfectly. Yet Noah is paying such close attention to the fulfillment of these 12 steps, i.e. the ways in which his life is finally fitting into the expected pattern of a rom-com, that he misses emerging red flags in that very relationship. Drew is emotionally manipulative, controlling, and indeed leverages the romance formula against Noah to get him to do what he wants. It also means that, simultaneously, Noah is oblivious to his growing feelings for a different, much more awkward and less picture-perfect, love interest named Devon. In the end, Noah breaks up with Drew, and after some trials and tribulations, achieves a happy ending with Devon instead. In the breakup with Drew, the rom-com formula is taken apart and critiqued. Noah's reliance on it, his insistence at shoving himself into a normative vision of romantic happiness, eventually made him miserable. Yet the rom-com formula also remains perfectly intact in Noah's relationship with Devon, complete with meet-cutes, interventions of fate, grand gestures, and the promise of a happy future against all odds. Arguably, Meet Cute Diary queers this formula, not just by having this romance occur between queer and trans characters, but by injecting some queer critique into the very formula in which it exists. Similarly, but taking a different tact, Alice Oseman's 2020 YA novel Loveless stars a protagonist in love with love in the midst of a narrative that interrogates those familiar romance codes through a queer lens. Georgia is, like Noah, attuned to the tropes of the good old-fashioned romance. Fiction is the frame of reference used to express George's romantic idealism at the beginning of Loveless, in the following passage. I just loved love. I was a dreamer, maybe, who liked to yearn and believed in the magic of love. Like the main guy from Moulin Rouge, who runs away to Paris to write stories about truth, beauty, freedom, and love, even though he should probably be thinking about getting a job so he can actually afford to buy food. Yeah, definitely me. Georgia, however, has never dated nor fallen in love herself. This is something she's determined to change as she heads to her first year of university. She outlines her plans as follows. I was going to reinvent myself and become someone who could fall in love, someone who could fit in with my family, with people my age, with the world. I'd get a boyfriend, or a girlfriend even, a partner. I'd have my first kiss and I'd have sex. I wasn't just a late bloomer. I wasn't going to die alone. I was going to try harder. I wanted forever love. I didn't want to be loveless. But what Georgia discovers is that she is aromantic and asexual. She does not experience romantic or sexual attraction. For someone who has been taught to equate maturity, fitting in, and happiness with the familiar Bible of expectations of the romance plot, not being able to fall in love sounds like a curse. Across the novel, Georgia must reckon with this, addressing the heteronormativity and centrality of the romance plot to an awful lot of fiction and to expected life narratives as well. She has experienced, as Jack Halberstam would put it, queer failure. But as Halberstam also puts it, there is a queer art to failure, and there is queer potential in playing with these expectations and rebuilding them on our own terms. George's narrative, like Noah's, ends up deconstructing the rom-com formula but ultimately putting it back together again. The climax of Loveless has Georgia completing grand gestures to prove her platonic love to her friends, in the exact manners that she would be winning them back if they were her romantic love interests. Georgia even gets her wish of receiving an emotional, poetic, climactic love confession, but this confession comes from her new friend, using the language and tools of the romance to instead convey how much Georgia means to her on a platonic, familial level. These scenes are given the same weight that they would be in a romance format, albeit with its component parts switched out and rearranged to prioritise friendship and found family. It may be more accurate to call Loveless a comedy about romance rather than a romantic comedy given all this, but regardless I want to include it in this discussion for what it does to provide a queer alternative to these stories of affection and connection, while ultimately sticking to the common Bible of expectations. There are many complexities to switching aro-ace characters into conventional romance narratives, but you can learn more about that in my other papers, which I will link in the transcript. Caitlin R. Brown writes that, quote, Queer YA has, for its entire existence, wrestled with the tension between depicting the queerphobic world as we now know it and offering more optimistic roadmaps to both queer and non-queer readers. These two novels, and many more that I could discuss in a longer project, provide a platform to explore this sort of intertextual tension. Consider also novels like Kira Smith's The Falling in Love montage, Amy Spaulding's The Summer of Jordi Perez, and many more that imbue their protagonists with an awareness of the genre they inhabit, paired with an anxiety that they, themselves, as queer teenagers, surely have no part in it. But, as Noah also expressed in my opening quote, if we want meet cutes, we have to make them ourselves. And indeed, many queer authors are taking these tropes into their own hands and making these new texts. These novels acknowledge the heteronormative history of the rom-com and the way romance narratives are placed ideologically above other kinships, and they offer critique of these conventions. But they also celebrate these narratives and affirm their protagonists, and any readers who may feel the same way, by offering happy endings in a revised, queered love story formula. Thank you so much for listening today, and enjoy the rest of the symposium.